The subtle art of prototyping, and prototyping is actually something I want to talk about. It's a concept, and you can read all about it if you want. Launched by a guy called Alberto Savoia. And I saw Alberto Savoia present this 2 or 3 years ago at Google in Silicon Valley. And I remember, and probably just because I'm dumb and you aren't, but that's why I'm saying this, when he had that presentation on prototyping, I was this close from putting up my hand and saying he had a typo on his presentation, which is really good that I didn't, because it was not a typo at all and would made me look so stupid. But so luckily I could hold myself pretending to be smart. Prototyping, really, really interesting. What's the basis of this? I'm not going to talk about this long. Accelerating innovation. We see innovation has happened whatever you look at, whether it's the number of patents that are granted, if you look at over the time, or if you see at the adoption curves of new technology, if you look at technologies that are older, how long it took before you get beyond this 80-90% of adoption rate, and how fast it is going today. And it's not just Snapchat, it's take about the Amazon Echo that was shown earlier by Luis, for instance, is a good example. Echo was launched in 2015. 11 or 12% of all American households have a smart speaker in their home, and it is estimated that over 40% of all American households will have one in their house by the end of this year. So that is, talk about rapid adoption of some new technology that is really, really fast. So that is an important one. And most companies, how they innovate really close with really small things to their core business, not messing up with anything that they're doing. Whereas the potential is to obviously do much bigger things, much more all over the place. That's what I talked about yesterday, the apex innovators. So typically the companies like Tesla, the ones that we admire, are what they call apex innovators. And what are apex innovators? Companies that test a lot of ideas from a wide range, small, big, stupid ones, disruptive, whatever, in a really short amount of time. So not the one big innovation project that we're going to do with an agency or in that incubator hub or something. No, we do like a million things at the same time. But most innovative ideas fail, and obviously most companies are terrified of failure. So how do we deal with that? So this was a chart of all 24,500 blah 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 new products that sort of appeared every year. This was from Nielsen, and then you see that 80% of those projects don't end up being a successful project because they're either cancelled or because they failed or whatever it was. And we'll skip this slide and actually see that most new products will fail in the market or services, even if they are competently executed. So, that's an interesting question. Like, why does it even fail if it's everything there was perfect? Everything seemed to be perfect. Sometimes even the better quality product fails versus a competitor, and I think. Or maybe just this shows my age again, but Betamax is a very good example of that, right? It shows my age. I can see people looking in the middle of Betamax. What the fuck is he on about? But that is a really good example. Actually, and this maybe shows again that I'm biased because I worked at Microsoft at the time, but the Zune was a far better iPod or MP3 player than the iPod was. The software sucked, but in hardware it was much better. It failed nevertheless. Happens to the best of us. This is just a random snapshot of some popular, well not popular, Google services, all that have failed. I'm not sure if you remember things like Jaiku, for instance. Who remembers Jaiku? It's sort of like a Google Twitter version kind of thing. What was that called? Wave? And Knoll, whatever it called, like it was like a knowledge. You remember that? Cool kind of things. Not so much because they failed. Same thing for Microsoft. Even though some of them been successful for a while, Encarta, at a certain point in time, again my age, but we had this disk on our desk Again, failed to sort of foresee whatever Wikipedia was doing and go into that space. Soapbox is actually something I helped launch very successfully, as you can tell, because it's dead. This was MSN's YouTube. So just to give you an example. So when you look at failure, there is Alberto Savoia will talk about there's 3 reasons or 3 core reasons why things fail, which would be the launch, how it's put in the market, how we operate it, how it works, and what the premise of the idea was to begin with. And the key problem is that most of the true failures, if you look at the long term, are based on this. Because these 2 are things you can correct. You could launch again or do something again about that, or do a different campaign, and even in operations even a little bit more difficultly, but you can tweak, you can change how the things work. But if the basis for your idea is not correct, then that's a bummer. And so the prototyping is actually pretending you have a prototype. So it is trying to make sure that before you build it, you can test if you're building the right thing, right? So if a prototype is see if you can build something, like physically, then a prototype is figuring out if you should build something. And that doesn't necessarily just have to be a product, but that can be a service as well, or that can be a business model. So trying to figure out if this, basically what he calls to get out of thought land, if this idea that is really great in your head, if that's really a great idea, and is there a way that you can test it before you're actually like making the whole organization and everything around it. And so I think in some of the exercise that we want to do and looking at the sort of innovative models of that we want to come up with when how we can make money and be a business over the next decades, it would be really nice to try and see how we can prototype some of those ideas. Also, because you have quick results. The best example of a prototype that he gave, which I thought, I won't repeat this, but it probably again shows my age, was the Palm Pilot. I love the Palm Pilot. The Palm 5 was probably the smartest looking device on the planet. Especially since everybody was in Cyan land at that time, and now I'm losing you altogether. The Palm Pilot was literally a handheld computer, which was not connected to the internet. You had to put it in like a socket that was linked to your computer, so you would, update your agenda. They had no link to the internet. But it had your agenda with it. And so the inventor of the Palm Pilot thought it was a great idea to have such a, now that sounds weird because we all have that in our pockets right now, but he thought it would actually be a really good agenda, a good idea to have a digital agenda and all of your contacts with you all the time. Well, this is longer ago, okay? And so to test this idea, he made a really small, like the size of sort of what eventually would be the Palm Pilot, something that would fit in his pocket, and this is literally what it would look like. It would obviously be printed, and would have that with him. And every time he would meet a person or something, and thinking about maybe we should meet, he would see if he would pull out the thing. If he wouldn't resort to his agenda, if that would be something he would want to do, as in a first test case for him. That was a good idea without starting actually building a hardware device. And so Alberto Savoia did some test or research, you wouldn't call it, but tried to define what all kinds of possible prototypes are. And so I'll explain you a little bit which ones they are, and then that can sort of help you guide your thinking. So I'll start with, we have the Pinocchio prototype. This was the one I just talked about with the Palm Pilot. The Mechanical Turk is an interesting one. It's what IBM used for the before they made the text-to-speech computer. So what they actually did was have a computer, then invited business people to talk, explain in the principle, have business people talk to the computer, and then literally text would appear, but that would be a typist in the other room just typing. It's a little bit like you mentioned earlier with the AI piece. But just to see how people would respond to it, how they would react to it, how much they would actually like that idea and find that comfortable. Actually, that tested didn't test so well. So, but you haven't made anything. You're just make it look like you have it. That's why it says, pretending to have a prototype, so you can actually test the premise. This one is a good one, and I'll have them in different. The fake door prototype is a good one. An example is the Mac Spaghetti. Before that was launched, McDonald's put that on the menu in specific restaurants, and then just to see if people would ask for it, and if they asked for it, they just would say that it was not available at the moment, but just as an easy test to see if that's something like people would eat. Don't Google this. That's like, and especially in Italy, this has to be like the most silly, disgusting thing you can imagine, but that does exist. So basically, you put something as part of an existing offering, only it doesn't exist. For all of the slides, it always has more specific notes and some additional examples, and the slides are shared, so again, for you to consult if you want. And also you can read a little bit more about, but I didn't think that is, I didn't want to go in that level of detail, but he talks about the initial level of interest. And the initial level of interest is where you measure the actual action that people do versus how they've shown interest. So shown interest would be, I'll explain in a second. I'll give you this example first. So for instance, if people are interested in buying the Michael Bolton action figure, to do the AdWords for this, there is like a simple landing page with like a pre-order button. The pre-order button is important because show interest, everything in clicking on the ad, visiting the site is just showing interest. It's the actual clicking on the buying or pre-order button that is a qualifier as that you would actually do this. Just to make a difference into sort of showing or declaring there's a certain interest in a specific thing versus taking the actual action to acquire it. And that's the initial level of interest is one device by the other. So that's what happens there. So again, very easy thing to do. There's actually quite a few interesting testing principles that I don't get why nobody uses this in advertising, but where we would, for instance, buy AdWords with specific queries and specific pieces of copy just to test base ideas, like strategic ideas that we have that we want to sell into a client, and where we showcase preferences of people because of how much they click on there, just specifically on the ad, because there you use this as a research tool. Facade prototype, something like what Cars Direct did. So the founder of Cars Direct, when he actually founded, or before he founded Cars Direct, he made a really simple web page where he started selling cars online. And then when somebody actually would buy a car on his website, he would then go buy it and deliver it at the person's door. Just to see, so he had nothing, there was no business yet. And then he sold 2 cars, I believe, in that first weekend. And giving enough proof that idea of selling cars online is something that would work, that is a good idea. Obviously, he made no money on those first cars, but that is not important. It was just, Again, the names of the prototypes, that's not important. You could also argue, is that one so different as the other? That's also not the purpose of the presentation. The purpose is, think about if you have this innovative idea, concept, if you can find a way later at testing it without actually, hiring the people, making the building, making the templates, and whatever it is. The Pinocchio, that's explained that. Mechanical Turk, so what IBM did as an example. The YouTube prototype, and the example is like Google used for the Google Glass. So Google Glass did the rounds based on that initial video that was put on YouTube where they showcased what the Google Glass experience would be like. You couldn't get the actual product, that you could get it later, but you could show interest, and you could show interest by paying, I think it was saying that you were interested, and you had to put down $1,500, I think, at the time, if you would want to be one of the first to get a Google Glass. So likely the product at that time was already further down the road in development, but you get a really good feel of people showing interest before they have the product because they're just watching a film. And they're putting down $1,500, which is, you look at your initial level of interest, is a very concrete thing in saying, you know, that's a good chunk of money. That's not just saying, yeah, I'd buy that, which usually advertisers go on about. The one-night stand prototype, Airbnb, famous story. Two guys that can't pay San Francisco rent, and so they have, 3 mattresses that they can rent out if they get the bigger space. So they decide to make a little website and some photos, and they get 3 people to for $80. That's how it was advertised, to rent out the other 3 places, so they could actually rent the place, which is the start of Airbnb. But a very simple way also of testing a premise, although it was a very selfish thing to begin with, but there was nothing there. They just rented out their own space and see how that would work out. MVP, I think you all know the MVP, minimum viable product. I don't even think the iPhone is a really good example of a minimum viable product, but where you say I'm going to make the first base model or a first base product of what it is that my idea is about, with very limited functionality, but limited functionality that are very good and very specific to the base idea that I have, to see how I can develop it from there. I think the iPhone, the first iPhone, was a little bit more than that, especially giving, and again, I worked at Microsoft, so I was running around with a Windows-operated smartphone at the time, which is not the nicest thing to show your friends. The Infiltrator prototype, like the Hub, I probably got to say this. This is a really interesting example, specifically also within the marketing context. So there's a couple of guys so it's not the light, who invent this little thing where you can put in like leathers and hang your keys, that they think is a good idea. And you can look up the video on YouTube if you want. So what they did is they had made a few of those and then stuck them in IKEA. So they had dressed themselves up as IKEA salespeople, with the yellow IKEA shirt, and stuck these on some of the walls at IKEA, like in a kitchen, one of the IKEA kitchens and stuff like that, with small paper notes you could take. I don't remember exactly what it was, like a number you could text to or something like that, showcasing that you had interest in getting the product once it came out. Obviously, they didn't tell IKEA that they were doing it, but they filmed it, and then you saw so many people taking the little paper wrap off that they used that to then go to IKEA and say, this is not only a good idea, your clients want this, because they've been telling us in your own store that this is a good idea. So again, something is a little bit more disruptive, but thinking about how can I maybe test a specific idea, actually infiltrating, is it a competitor or infiltrating another part of the business somehow with my notion. Again, abstract right now, but think about this. So obviously you don't see it here, but they named their product especially for IKEA, also with the two, dots on the, I guess like well-hub or whatever it is that all these odd, really IKEA products are called. And then the impersonator prototype is like an example is the first Tesla, the Roadster. I don't know if people actually remember that this was the first Tesla, but in look of the car, this is pretty much the Lotus Elise, right? And it was based on a Lotus Elise. Also in design, it didn't do much to try and step away from it, so it's the part of the same frame. Obviously, they changed it a little bit, but to focus all on if there would be a market for that electric car rather than go and design something. No, you do something people want, but you make something different with that, and then you advertise it, same as with the Google Glass, in a way that people that were interested in buying this could put down $5,000 to be the first to have it, money that was then used to actually produce the first car. So it's an interesting circle again but with hard commitment, right? $5,000. It was $1,500 in Google Glass. It's taking the actual paper in IKEA. It's not just clicking on the search ad, but clicking on the buy now button, so that in your test of your scenario, you're a little bit specific into knowing that this is an actual thing a person would be doing, rather than a statement on, I'd be interested in that kind of stuff if that ever comes out. That's what you get in most test results, and there's little to no value in that. And I think that's the last one. So Pretotyping, I think a really interesting concept, especially if you're working around something that you don't know. We try and do that in the agency as well. I don't know if I talked about this yesterday, but we've the certain point in time see that the media agencies are selling more and more content to our clients. Obviously, that's not something we want to let happen. So we made a specific setup where we told the clients that because we own the brand and are better at ideas, and that we also were able to do the media. So I had somebody from another agency to come and be with us as sort of the media performance guy, and we presented that setup to a client who bought into it. And last year we sold €250,000 euros in media, which was not a business we did before, but we sold it in a model that hadn't done anything, that you had a vision about it, but that was there to test. So especially if you're trying to do some innovative ideas, that is there. Same thing as we're doing right now. That mini studio is there for us to use in our own content production. That is a little bit more prototyping, but the Pretotyping model is that I'm now selling clients a service where I can help them be better at their setting up their own production, and I only showcase the fact that I have it myself as proof that I am capable of talking to that topic. Never done it before. We'll see where it goes.